Welcome to Westmont's Compelling Conversations. I'm Gayle D. Beebe, president of Westmont College. In Compelling Conversations, I engage scholars, leaders, authors, and members of our community in discussions that inform us about essential issues and encourage us to take meaningful action.
Well, Betty, thank you. It's wonderful to see you. And as everything has been going on this last year, of course, my mind has often gone to you. And as a person that I experienced as just a bridge builder, somebody who creates connections into a variety of areas of life, different spheres of society, and works to improve them. But you started out, and it's just fascinating that you're actually back in Jacksonville where you were born and raised. And I would love for you to talk about growing up there and what your experiences were, and then your aspirations to go on to college, getting your doctorate, spending 11 years, I believe it was, at the Kellogg Foundation. And then I think you were at Spring Arbor 13 total, weren't you?
12 years. 12 years.
Mm-hmm. And then just even your connection, cycling back with John Burkhardt at University of Michigan and your work there. And then literally it coming full circle with you now moving back to Jacksonville, touching a number of organizations and continuing work that has really been a part of your adult life, but must have been your adult life must have been very different from what you thought it would be when you were growing up in Jacksonville.
Certainly, Gayle. In fact, I really appreciate your thinking about me. When you said interview me, I went, oh wow, why are they wanting to interview me? I've done much. So it's great to be able to be allowed to reflect on some of these things through the year. As you said, I was born here in Jacksonville, Florida, on the northeast side in what at that time would have been the African American community. There were no in the community where I was born, there were no whites living. It was segregated south, and Jacksonville was a segregated community. So I was born, mom and dad, and a brother. I'm the sort of middle child, the fact of a family that's kind of bookend on my mother had children early on, brother and sister, and then many years later, my sister and I came along. So I came along first, and then my sister. So there are four of us all together: three girls and a boy. So I was born here. In fact, just recent experience, I was born actually at home. And then taken to the hospital. So there was a program recently here on the television for Black History Month, and it was showing the old Brewster Hospital, which was the segregated hospital. So there was a special hospital for African Americans. And my mother I was supposed to be born there, and they were looking for my dad, and we didn't get there in time. So I came at home and then was taken to Brewster. So it was great seeing the old pictures of Brewster. My sister was born at that segregated community. It's interesting a little bit on the background on the family. My mom was, for her day, a fairly educated woman. She came from what would have been for Black communities at that time, kind of middle class. Black family, valedictorian of her high school, graduating class, all of those kinds of things. Yeah. Then married what my grandmother called a ne'er-do-well, cab driver, but who was attracted, she said, because he had an accent. He was from Cuba, not from this country. So it was very interesting. Family did not really approve of the marriage. She had kind of married down. from this. And in fact, Gail, I come from, I think when the interviews were on and it was this person coming in who identified herself as Catholic, but I think one of the things I always said about my role at Spring Arbor is I understood and honored because I had grown up in those two communities. As a Catholic and identifying fairly early as a Catholic. But, I come from a long line of Baptist and Methodist ministers on my mother's side of the family. So I had gone to Bible school, to Sunday school and all those things, had Easter speeches at the local Black churches here, lots of those through the years, because after my father left, there was no one to take me to Catholics until I got old enough to do that myself. So I had been part of Black Protestantism for as much time in some ways as I had, the role of my, what at that time when I came to Spring Arbor, my Catholic faith. So it was a great blend for me. I attended the public schools here in Jacksonville and graduated from New Stanton High School, which was the largest high school for Blacks. It was a very good school at the time, and probably one of the best but for segregated schools. It was the best Black high school with great teachers. And in fact, when I think about the teachers that I had especially in junior high and high school, many of them, when you look at their credentials, were master's degree, a couple of doctorates, and most of them, though, had gotten their degrees from schools in the North because they had to leave the South to go. So you would see University of Michigan, you would see schools in the Boston. I remember one from Boston College, places in the North that did admit African Americans. So to get their advanced education, they could not go to schools in the South. Often they would start at maybe historically Black schools, but would have to, for their advanced degrees, go on to major white institutions, and most of those were in the North. So I had teachers, faculty members who were wonderfully prepared. These were the right, had gone to FISP, which why I aspired to go there many years later. They'd gone to FISP, but then they'd gone to Johns Hopkins or, someplace like that for their master's or doctorate degree. So good education. So on the one hand, from the public school system, and then I was very much influenced as a young Catholic girl by the nuns who always, we're talking about people who encouraged me. So some of the people who always encouraged me to go on to a school were my teachers who saw something in me, but always the wonderful Josephite sisters here in the Florida area who at St. Pius Catholic Church and School, would encourage me to go on to get my education. Although we weren't sure how that was going to happen, because I had mentioned that my mom and father during this time when I was I think I was about 8 or 9 years old when my dad left us and went back down toward South Florida to the Key West, Miami area to live. Okay. I think it was much more culturally fit for him, but it left us. That's always impacted me. It's something that I have sort of struggled with all of my life. But anyway, so I had this wonderful, though supportive community here in Jacksonville. I was a smart girl,
You are smart.
Yeah, I was going to say by those measures. So I did well in school. I was remember being secretary of our Student Government Association at my high school. And I look back at the pictures in the yearbook and see myself looking over the principal's office. He was signing something we had done. I was the person who did the announcements on, we had morning announcements, and, they'd have students do that. And I was one of the persons who did that. So I think about people saying, you're articulate. And I think about the training that I got for that in a segregated high school. I finished high school in '66. That was also in the middle of, in the midst of the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
So I was always very much influenced by what was going on around me at that time, sitting, watching the television, watching the riots in Detroit and other places. We lived in the project at that time, because after my dad left, we moved to a housing project for a while. And I always laugh about that. My mother, when she was alive, I would sometimes say in speeches that I was a product of the Blodgett homes, which still exist here in Jacksonville on the other side of town here. I was a product of the Blodgett homes, so that one of these housing projects. And my mother always hated for me to say that. So why do you have to mention all of that? But we did. We lived in supplemental housing, subsidized housing here in Jacksonville. And then, as she got on her feet, we moved to a nicer home. But certainly for many years, and many of the formative years, we were there in the projects, and the wonderful people who were in that. So who took care of you. Mine was a sort of one of those latchkey kids.
Yeah.
My mom worked, and so my sister and I were there alone, but always supported the wonderful community around us. Recently, coming back to Jacksonville these last few years, I had a chance that area doesn't look anything like where it did when I lived here. But in fact, we passed by the pool. So the segregated black swimming pool was right in front of us. So the way the project, so we were always really pleased about where we weren't in front of another unit. In front of us was this great field and park, which was the Jefferson Street pool. And I was with my sister recently. We went over by the hospital, and she said, "There's the pool." And I had to look because, of course, it looks complete. So I said, I was driving, I turned around, and of course, went back. And sure enough, the pool is still there after all these years. But of course, the projects that I lived that were just in front of that pool are now, there's not even a road there. But lived in front of that. And it was a great space for us. Down the street were, many of the young people who I went to school with, Emerson Thompson, who's now a judge here in Florida and was nominated. So there was a group of folk who were, who became, in some ways, Black leadership here in the state of Florida that I grew up with in that segregated community in the project here in Jacksonville. So I understood that I was in some ways poor.
Okay.
So because I was in some ways a one-parent family after my dad left. My mom worked for Dixie Pharmacy for many years until she retired. So she was always supportive. I had wonderful supportive people around me. It was the days when anybody in the neighborhood could get chastise you. So while you out, get home. But we were fairly disciplined. My sister and I, we had to come home when we got out of school. My mom wasn't there. We had to do our homework. I was always a good student. So I did my homework, and then we could play. We could go out to the park. We were safe in that community. So I never felt threatened. I was not, certainly prior to the days of drugs, although there were people in there we remember one time my sister and I still tease about the drunk man coming down the street, we turn the hose on and get away from our place. But we were safe.
Yeah.
We felt ourselves well loved, well taken care of, even though I know that I certainly did not have a lot. We did not have a car, for example. I never had a car. We always had to use public transportation or walk. Everywhere we are. So that's the kind of background that I come out of. But with that education, I was able to, at that appropriate time, apply for college. I applied both for, things were opening up. As I said, this was the days of the civil rights movement. Blacks were being allowed into colleges. So I applied both to historically Black schools and to the new white institution. I was accepted at quite a few of those new white, because they were eager to get classes, especially ones very well prepared. But I ended up going to a historically Black college, Tennessee State University. Yeah. Actually, my first choice had been the University of Miami, because that was where my dad was in that area. And I wanted to go there. And they had accepted me, but screwed up the financial aid. And so I don't know whatever happened with that, but I didn't get any offers of aid. And so I had to go where we could afford to send me, which was Tennessee State. So
Betty, were you the first from your family to go to college, or had your mother gone to college?
My mother had started to school, but wasn't able to finish school. She got pregnant, and so was not. I remember her talking about wanting to go on and finish, and writing her father to ask for aid to go to school. And wasn't able to get it. And so she was very, when I say I was encouraged, my mom was probably the first one, because I think, and I've always, my sister never, that she wanted for us to do what she wasn't able to do. So I had an aunt who had gone to nursing school. My mom's sister did go on to nursing school in South Carolina, and ended up head of one of the units at a hospital in New York. They moved to New York, and she was for years. I remember her retirement party, just a major thing, because she'd been head of a unit for years there at Jamaica Hospital. But there weren't very many of us who at that time went on to higher education.
Well, Betty, where did you do your doctoral work?
I did my doctoral work at Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
I went from Tennessee State, which was in Nashville. And by that time I'd gotten married, and I ended up at Vanderbilt, which was an interesting thing. I was discouraged from going. Vanderbilt was opening up, and State, the historically Black school, and Vanderbilt there in the city, but they had not been very successful in getting their students into Vanderbilt and having them, as they say, stay there. Kind of washed us out very quickly, even when they met at us. So I remember my major professor discouraging me from going to Vanderbilt. But I was kind of place bound at the time. So walked over there, I put in my application, was accepted. And actually, Gayle, my major professor, so I got to Tennessee State, found the same thing that I found at my local school. Great professors, great professors, well prepared. Dr. Collins was a PhD in English from Cornell, and he had a law degree. That's what his vision was for me too. So English and law, which was what, and he had practiced for a short while. So and before going back to State to teach. He said, go some other place. In fact, he wanted me not to go to school in the South, because he said those things were still there. So going to Vanderbilt, go out of state. But as I said, at that time I couldn't.
Yeah.
So I went to Vanderbilt and was accepted in both the law school and in the PhD program.
Oh, that's fabulous.
So because that's what he kind of do law, and then I had to make a choice at the point of which one I was going, because I had kind of said I was going to follow his path. I was interested in law and in English and so forth. So I was going to do both, applied for both programs, got accepted into both. The PhD program, however, offered me more money. And so I thought, okay, I'll start with the PhD. And then I'll move over, I'll later go and do law, because the PhD offered me a nice scholarship, fellowship to do the program there. So I did go there, finished up. Found it was challenging, but wasn't difficult. Yeah, it wasn't difficult. Yeah, I thought I had good preparation for the program that they were offering, and I had some encouragement. There were some people who weren't so nice, but by and large, my major professor, Dr. Tauster, was a wonderful Southern woman with a little bun, gray bun at the back of her head, Eva Tauster. And so she kind of took me under her wings. And when I decided I just couldn't do this and I was going to quit, I remember her calling me at my home, said, "You're one of my best students. You better get yourself back here." So it's found there some people who were not very receptive, but also found some people who were very, very supportive.
Well, Betty, when you look at, in just a week, we're going to have a lecture presentation by Nancy Keene, a professor at Harvard, who's written this book called Forged in Crisis, and it looks at the lives of Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, Ernest Shackleton, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and Rachel Carson. When you look at your own life, what are some of these moments when you just literally had to persevere and not give up? Because you always are positive, you always find a way to solve problems, but it can't have just always worked out.
I think when I mentioned the loss of my dad, which everybody always says to me, you were his favorite. I was Smiley's kid, So that time that my father not being there had a profound impact. And I know on so much of what has happened to me in my life, and sort of figuring out how I was going to not let that throw me off. That became one of the moments in my life I had to kind of figure out, all right, that's happened next. I think another point for me was in my doctoral program, because I went from having been in all Black educational settings largely now to this huge white sort of environment. And quite honestly, Gail, I had never been in that environment. I had never been until, and in fact, even until after I finished Vanderbilt, while I was at that, had never been in the home of a white person.
Wow.
I had never had a real kind of conversations with anyone that wasn't, but there were white teachers at Tennessee State when I was there. The numbers were small, very, very small, but there had started being some. In fact, one of the things I always like to tell about historically Black schools is that most white schools, unless you're in the North, did not have Black teachers, but many Black colleges always had white.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that.
So think about especially the historically private institutions that were started by white missionaries who came south, Fisk and Morehouse and Spelman and all of those schools, or most of those schools were started with white missionaries or others who came south to educate the freedmen, the freed slaves. So most of the historically Black, and in fact, Fisk did not have a Black president until the 1940s, and it was.
Oh, how about that? Oh, that's.
So they were most of them were white missionary folk. Fisk was started by the Congregationalist Church, and so it, so we didn't, and while many of the state schools had Black leadership, there were always whites there to, so oftentimes assigned by governors and so forth as political jobs to teach at the Black schools. So Black schools always had white teachers. Yeah.
Gosh, that's fascinating. Well, Betty, you've had such a fascinating career, and we were together for 6 years at Spring Arbor when you were the chief academic officer and I was the president. I remember the process of hiring you and just the elements of it that were so interesting, including when we had Bishop Bates and Howard Snyder interview you on theology, and you actually were really wanting to know your theology, and that's what this was about. But what have been stories that you're comfortable telling, just as your life has intersected so many of these, amazing institutions, Kellogg, University of Michigan, all of your consulting work. I mean, you've had an amazing career, and it's from a distance, it's fascinating to look at.
Well, I do, and trying to think about this interview and sort of thinking about those. When I left Tennessee State and Vanderbilt, I actually took a job teaching public school. So I started in the K-12 system and taught for about a year and a half, and then, like with many women, became pregnant, so stopped. And it was then that I went on and got my master's and then into my doctoral degree program at Vanderbilt. But then my major professor, about the time I was finishing up my master's degree, my major professor asked if I would come back to Tennessee State to teach. So my first college level teaching was back at my alma mater, working with him, teaching in the English department there, and also working on a federal grant that he had. And then I left there about time I was finishing up my doctorate. FIS called. And in some ways that became one of my dream jobs. FIS was one of the schools, the Black schools I considered going to at that time. It was one of the elite Black institutions in the nation. Du Bois had been there, all of those. So, in fact, when Du Bois left this and went to Harvard, it's recorded that he said, at Harvard, I found better known teachers, but no better teachers. So I got to, for 5-6 years, walk on that campus and teach in that environment. And it was absolutely inspirational. It was, in some ways, more like Spring Arbor. It had been created by the congregation, founded by the Congregationalist Church. We had a chapel, all of those things. But I was, I always felt there, I was walking in the footsteps of history. So if I think about all of the people, Dixwell and Johnson, all of the people who had been at FIS, looking at the painting in of the Jubilee Singers, all of those things there, going to chapel, all the world figures that came to that campus. It was a dream come true for me. So to be there, I left there to become dean of the graduate school at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. So I then was leaving a historically Black school and struggled over that to go to a majority institution. But my 7 years at Arkansas were wonderful. I was there during the Clinton years. And so it was very fascinating. But I actually got to interact with them, to know them. My wonderful vision of Hillary Clinton is sitting in her living room with her shoes off. She was a young woman, wife, like any other, coming home from she was at the law office at that time. I was on a committee and sitting there with her, and we got there early. She had offered the governor's mansion as the place for our meeting, and sitting there with her talking, Clinton appointed me to a number of commissions in the state of Arkansas. So I really loved being in that environment, and think because it's such a small state that you can have really influence.
That's wonderful.
That state. So doing things like being appointed to by the judge because integration had come through, and the struggle to be one of the examiners of what was happening in the public school systems of Little Rock with their education system, and being able to go in and monitor what was happening there. So those are some highlights. Being asked to be part of an organization, the National Panel of American Women, who one of the early groups starting to bring together across multicultural lines, in this case, women. So as much of the kind of panel things that you see nowadays, we were starting those very in Nashville, and then into Overton, Arkansas, very early on. So it would always be a Black woman, a Jewish woman, a white woman, some other talking about our experiences and being able to do, working even there with a project on the Klan. And being a little fearful about that, but engaging with it. And one of the reasons I was interested in doing that, and I did mention when I was talking about growing up, when we did move out of the project in Jacksonville to a home, we moved into a neighborhood that was newly integrated. So when you talk about also moments that impacted me, we moved from the project into this community where Blacks were it's called Springfield, it's still here, where Blacks were just moving in. And as part of that, the Klan, in protest for Blacks moving into that community, came through one day. So so I actually had my first Klan experience was being in our home, which was a little white, you saw it now, you go, this is very small little house in what is now a much more rundown neighborhood. But for us, it was a great place coming out of the project into this house. And the Klan, but what happened, they were going to do a march through the area, and it rained that day. So they didn't march through, they drove through. And when they got to our house, which was white, they threw something, it was supposed to be burning. So I think they were trying to set it afire. But because of the weather, it hit the house, which was left a smudge there, and fell to the ground. But we had our own little Klan experience. And so then going to Arkansas with this project and then working with the idea of having conversations with people who were members of the Klan. And it was scary. But it happened. So I can remember those things. I can remember the protests at Vanderbilt when the team from South Africa came to play. And by that time, with my children, going out to the park with my kids, one by the hand and one on my back, to march and to protest for the Vanderbilt allowing the tennis team from South Africa to play because of a protest against apartheid. So those were some of the experiences, Gayle, that I remember so well, that kind of being able to put yourself out there in terms of what you believed in. Being activists, I've always tried to not just talk about what I believed, but indeed try and live what I believe. I tell people I am clearly a product of the 60s. I mean, I drank that in wholehearted, all the King stuff. I describe myself oftentimes as an integrationist. And so even though I left, and in fact, I think very deliberately about why I have done some of the things I did, moving from historically Black schools into majority institutions, very early when folks were starting to do that, because that was what my mother and everyone else told me I was being prepared to do. I remember so vividly my mother saying when we were living in the project, struggling and so forth, she had a great belief that things were going to get better for people like me. And she said to me at one point, when the doors are open, some of you need to be prepared to walk in. So she had a great sense that the doors would open. And she said it would be ashamed if doors are open and people aren't ready to move into those roles and places. So Gayle, I have always seen myself as walking into those. Sometimes the first, like at Spring Arbor, first African American, first woman. When I was so many places at Arkansas, first woman, first African American dean. So over and over again, I just keep repeating that story. When the doors are open, some of you need to be prepared to walk in.
Yeah.
Those are I think when you talk about what are the drivers for me, being unafraid to walk in, even sometimes when I'm not prepared as well, I shouldn't do this, but saying someone needs to be the first, someone, and trying to be, even though afraid, I'm often afraid,
Yeah.
but being willing to step in, because that's what my mother told me.
Yeah. Well, Betty, you are incredibly good at it, and
I don't know about that, but
you're also humble about it. But you really did a marvelous job at Spring Arbor. I loved what you accomplished during the time we were together there.
Well, I think you were awfully brave too. So I often think about you in that. I mean, I remember when you drove over to Battle Creek to meet with me. So bringing in a woman, a person of color, and even someone who, boldly claimed her Catholicism in an evangelical Protestant community, because for me at that time, it would have been a stopper if you said, well, fine, but as a Catholic, I mean, you've been grown up in both, and so we would want you to sort of put aside a little bit that I would not have come for that, but that you were willing to say that this, and actually when we talked to the folk at the foundation the other week, I told that story as a way of having them think about Spring Arbor as a place that was willing to take risks, willing to diversify it, when many other evangelical Christian institutions would have said, absolutely not. Spring Arbor was open to that.
Betty, and all of that is true, and I so appreciate you speaking to that. I remember Dr. McKenna saying, we have got to be alert. I mean, he basically said, you could lose your presidency over this. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, then who needs to interview her? Because I said, she's both a Baptist and a Catholic.
Yes.
She loves maths, yes. But when you pray with her, she prays like a Baptist.
Yes.
And then Betty, what was in my upbringing was my father had said, never get fired unless it's for a principle. Mm-hmm. And I really was thinking about, he said, as we were working through that, I thought, okay, this is all about how we move forward. And I personally, I thought you were incredibly courageous because we were inviting you in to help us get better, help us change. And again, I didn't know that too. I didn't know you had done, that this is really a pattern of your life of breaking new ground everywhere you go. Could you speak just briefly into what you hope for our cultural moment? It's 2020 was a very challenging year, very disruptive in many respects. And what are thought leaders that you're looking to? Who are you finding are the voices that are really helping us move to a better place?
It's interesting. Someone asked me that the other day, and I was trying to think about who I'm listening to, but it's not a person that I'm listening to, our thought leaders, but I am listening to the voice of young people.
Okay.
And I am seeing them saying enough is enough. But where I'm also seeing it, because of where I have walked in, I'm also seeing that across racial lines. So I'm certainly looking to many African American youth who are standing up. I initially was not a real proponent of Black Lives Matter. I have come around to that slogan and that sense, because I know it's not an organization that I'm supporting.
Right.
I'm supporting a concept.
Yeah.
In terms of that, and it's fed by youth and the sense that many of us. I went to another demonstration that was here in Jacksonville for the first time in many years, Gayle, last summer when these things were happening. I actually had my little placard and I was out on the street, sort of walking. I think this could be. We thought the civil rights movement was sometimes I don't think we're vigilant enough. So we get to these mountaintop times, and we celebrate, and then we go on and back to. And I think one of the things that I have is a sense of vigilance around how do we maintain. We talk about sustainability in so many ways now, but how do we have made progress, but how do we not only sustain and continue to move that through time? And I think that's where we need to. And I think I'm applauding our young people for standing up. And saying, yes, all lives matter, but in particular times, you have to look at the specificity of things like Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, I really resonate with that, because there is deep prejudice across our society, but there's unusually deep prejudice that's afflicted the Black community. And I really I've thought about the Black lives that have impacted me, going clear back to sixth grade when I had a baseball coach, Art Blunt, who was the first Black that I was in close proximity to, where I would ask him questions about life. He would talk about growing up in East Oakland. He was best friends with Willie Stargell, the Hall of Fame outfielder and wonderful athlete himself. But just over time, the people God has put in my life that have really been able to help me enlarge my perspective have been critical. And you're just one of the people that really helped me enlarge my perspective and enlarge my understanding.
And when I was at FIS, there were too many times, I'm not at FIS, but at the University of Michigan in these recent years. So students would come to me, white students would come to me there and tell me, you're the first Black professor that I've had. So I know that while progress has been made, when at this time in my life, at a place like that, when students are still telling me I'm the first Black professor that they have had, that is still astonishing to me. That says that integration is, when I do now workshops on diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's part of the work I do. But I'm still, I'm going back to, where did we forget this integration, and we're supposed to be coming together, My church, Gayle, you'll be proud of. I go to a Black Baptist church right now that's predominantly white. I'm on the worship team, and I'm part of the prayer group. And I was in this church right down the street right here. I'm going, but it still continues, because I say I need to be there present. How do we get integrated if folks still stay? I am so much now against this separate stuff. We're going to be together. I tell my brother-in-law, well, I don't like the music there. It's not a Black church. And I'm going, heaven is not going to be segregated.
I love that. That's actually a great line.
I know, and I keep trying to get people to say why am I in that white church? And heaven is not going to be segregated.
Amen. Well, Betty, so great to see you. God be with you, and thank you.
Join us next time for another compelling conversation with President Gayle D. Beebe.